The black belt heiress challenges the black maid, but it's the secret behind it that truly leaves everyone speechless. Soft dawn light filtered through the dense canopy, spilling across the grand Whitmore estate. This was the neighborhood of opulent mansions, where wealth and power hid behind imposing gates. Among them, the Whitmore mansion stood out with its soaring white columns and gleaming glass windows, a silent display of authority so chilling it needed no voice. Inside the vast main hallway, Kenya Johnson's footsteps echoed softly against the polished marble floor. Dressed in her deep navy uniform and crisp white apron, she knelt to meticulously scrub each tile. Her hands, calloused from years of tireless labor, moved with a graceful precision that spoke of her mastery over even the most exhausting tasks. Morning sunlight danced across her rich ebony skin, reflecting a quiet beauty rooted in dignity. Kenya's naturally coiled hair was pulled back in a neat bun, revealing a face both strong and feminine. Every small gesture she made exuded rare poise and resilience. Yet her inner calm was abruptly shattered by sounds drifting in from the rear garden. Outside, Bruce Whitmore, the family's youngest son, was training in karate as he did every morning. Bruce's reputation wasn't just built on his affluent background, but on his black belt, a symbol of power he flaunted relentlessly. Beneath the ancient tree's shade, he unleashed fierce kicks against a heavy bag, each strike accompanied by a sharp, satisfying crack. His blonde hair was cropped short, his steely blue eyes cold and haughty. Clad in a pristine white gi, his gleaming black belt cinched around his waist like a badge of superiority, Bruce quirked a satisfied smile after every blow, reminding himself, and anyone watching, that he was unbeatable. "Faster, Bruce," urged his coach, a middle-aged man with silver hair, his tone patient but insistent. "They don't stand a chance," Bruce replied coolly, refusing even to glance back. "Not here, not anywhere." From inside the house, Kenya heard every word. She wasn't afraid, just acutely aware of the arrogance dressing itself up as discipline. She had grown all too familiar with that kind of contempt. No sooner had she finished cleaning the main hall than the great doors swung open. A uniformed driver carried in 2 leather suitcases, and behind him strode Ethan Whitmore, the eldest son, home for the first time in years. Ethan was a stark contrast to his brother. Tall and athletic, he moved with a calm, thoughtful air. He wore a beige linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up casually, dark jeans, and well-worn leather shoes. His green eyes were gentle, his light brown hair tousled just so. Ethan radiated friendliness and sincerity, nothing like the aloof aristocrat many expected. He stepped inside slowly, his gaze sweeping over the rooms as if trying to recall every beautiful and painful memory. Just then, his eyes found Kenya. She froze, bucket in hand, rag still clutched at her side. In that instant, time seemed to slow. Ethan looked at her not from above, but with a genuine, respectful curiosity. Kenya instinctively turned away, though her heart pounded in her chest. She sensed something different in his gaze, a tender sincerity she had never known. "Excuse me," Ethan said politely, stepping aside to let her pass. Kenya offered a small nod, her eyes still cast downward. Ethan watched her go a moment longer than he ought to have, then moved on toward the living room. "Master Ethan," the elderly housekeeper greeted as she approached. "Your mother is still resting upstairs. Will you be joining us for lunch?" "Yes," Ethan replied, his eyes drifting back toward where Kenya had vanished. "I'll be here a few days." Minutes later, as Kenya passed the kitchen, she spotted Ethan chatting warmly with the chef, asking about the peach sauce he'd loved since childhood. His humble, friendly manner surprised her, and for the first time she felt a genuine warmth in this otherwise chilly mansion. What Kenya didn't know then was that this seemingly chance encounter would ignite events so momentous they would alter her fate, and that of the entire Whitmore family, forever. Out in the garden, Bruce had just finished his proud karate demonstration. He untied his black belt, wiped his brow, and looked up at the window. There stood Ethan, peering down at the garden with a contemplative look, searching for something distant and different. Bruce frowned, a sudden discomfort coursing through him. He couldn't explain the feeling, but one thought hit him. Whoever, or whatever, captured Ethan's attention like that would pose the greatest threat to Bruce's standing in this family. And Kenya, quietly continuing her work, had no idea she was fast becoming the focal point of a silent battle, one that would put her dignity and self-respect to the most severe test she'd ever faced. The next morning, the Whitmore estate was still as ever. Kenya stood by the large second-floor window and gently drew aside the thick drapes, letting soft golden rays fill the room. From that vantage point, she had a clear view of the sprawling garden below, where Bruce was beginning his customary karate session. Her eyes drifted down, watching the familiar scene unfold. Bruce, dressed in his pristine white gi with his proud black belt cinched firmly at his waist, stood tall on the manicured lawn. Opposite him was Mike, his regular sparring partner, a promising young fighter, but far less skilled and experienced than Bruce. Kenya watched quietly as they bowed in respect, then launched into combat. Each punch and kick Bruce delivered was sharp and merciless. He moved with lightning speed, his cold blue eyes locked on his opponent like a ruthless predator. Mike, despite his best efforts, was completely outmatched. Bruce didn't just want to win. He wanted Mike to feel utterly defeated, to know the full weight of his power. Kenya frowned as she saw Mike crumple under a spiteful spinning kick. He lay still for a moment, his face contorted in pain, while Bruce simply stood over him, disdain and indifference etched on his features. Kenya felt her heart tighten. It wasn't the intensity of the fight that disturbed her, but Bruce's utter lack of compassion as he watched his friend suffer. "Get up!" Bruce barked, jaw jutting. "Don't be so weak." Mike struggled to his feet, wincing, head bowed in submission. Kenya turned away, unable to watch any longer. In her mind flashed a memory of her own karate training, how she'd learned that true martial artistry combined physical strength with self-control and compassion. Bruce might have formidable technique, but he clearly lacked the one quality that defines a true warrior: empathy. Shaking her head, Kenya refocused on her work, but unease lingered in her chest. She reminded herself that her role in this house wasn't to judge her employers. Yet, no matter how hard she tried to look away, she couldn't deny the growing discomfort she felt whenever she witnessed Bruce's callousness. Lost in thought, Kenya didn't notice Ethan stepping out onto the landing near the staircase. Since returning home, he'd found himself paying more attention to this woman than was customary, not just because of her natural, gentle beauty, but also due to the quiet dignity in every small gesture she made. He'd observed how rarely she looked up, as if she kept her true self safely hidden. Deciding to bridge the distance, Ethan approached softly and spoke in a gentle tone, careful not to startle her. "On a beautiful morning like this, you don't want to step outside for a bit?" Kenya started, then lifted her head to meet his genuinely concerned gaze. She quickly recovered her composure, offered a small smile, and bowed slightly. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore. I still have so much work to do." Ethan tilted his head, returning her smile, not at all arrogant like his brother. "I think you should take some time for yourself now and then." Work isn't everything, right? For a moment, Kenya stood speechless. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to her like that. There was a sincerity in Ethan's words unlike anything she'd ever encountered in this house. Gently, she shook her head. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore, but I know my place." Ethan opened his mouth to say more, but the sound of heavy footsteps behind them made both turn. Bruce emerged from the garden, sweat soaking his GI, his glare icy as he looked first at Ethan, then swept across to Kenya. He deliberately cast a sharp look at her, making his displeasure clear. "Ethan, you've only been back a short time, and you're already acting like you're comfortable here?" Bruce sneered. "Be careful, or people will start thinking the Whitmores are too soft on their help." The air grew tense. Kenya bowed her head, concealing her inner turmoil. Ethan, though composed, couldn't hide the flash of anger in his eyes. "Bruce, there's no need for that." Bruce shrugged, chuckling harshly as he strode past them without another word, though his resentment was plain to see. He despised that Ethan showed any kindness to someone as ordinary as Kenya, a person he considered unworthy of attention in their lofty world. Once Bruce was out of sight, Ethan turned back to Kenya, his eyes soft with regret. "I'm sorry about my brother." Kenya shook her head gently and offered him an understanding smile. Yet in her heart she knew one thing for certain. Two worlds were colliding, and soon she would have to choose which side to stand on in this silent but fierce struggle. A battle she never wanted, but one destiny seemed to have arranged long ago. That evening, the crystal chandelier in the Whitmore family's grand dining room blazed to life, casting a regal, powerful glow over everything. The long oak table, gleaming beneath its pristine white cloth, was set with shining silverware, sparkling crystal glasses, and exquisitely crafted china, each piece arranged with immaculate precision. Kenya and the serving staff moved like a well-oiled machine, placing each course and pouring every glass of wine with meticulous ceremony. Yet, despite the elegance, Kenya felt a surge of unease when she caught Bruce's cold, malicious glance flicker in her direction. Tonight's dinner was more significant than usual. Ethan, the eldest brother who had been away for years, was finally home. His return lent the evening an intimacy it rarely knew, but also ratcheted the tension to an almost unbearable level. Kenya gently lowered another dish onto the table, bowed her head, and stepped back. She always knew her place, outside the family drama, invisible to most, but from the moment the first course was served, she sensed something distinctly off in Bruce's demeanor. Bruce sat beside Ethan, composed and seemingly at ease, yet brimming with arrogance. He swept his gaze around the table before speaking loudly, deliberately ensuring everyone could hear. "Ethan, you know what? I'm genuinely surprised. You've only been back a day and you're already paying special attention to the maid. The way you look at her is interesting." The dining room fell into a heavy silence. All eyes turned to Kenya, who stood quietly at the edge of the room. Her heart fluttered, but her face remained serene, revealing nothing of her turmoil. She understood immediately. Bruce wasn't just trying to humiliate her. He was testing Ethan's patience as well. Ethan's brow furrowed. He looked at his brother with steely calm and said, "Bruce, I think you should show a little more courtesy. This is a family dinner." Bruce smirked, his cold blue eyes flashing with challenge. Undeterred, he pressed on. "I'm not accusing anyone, big brother. I'm just curious. Is she really so special that you'd focus on her like this?" Kenya heard every word. Her pulse quickened. Not from fear, but because in that moment she felt the sharp sting of insult, the way careless words can wound. Ethan could not remain silent. He slammed his glass down on the table. The sharp clink cut through the tension. "Bruce, I don't know what you're trying to achieve, but this is not how the Whitmore family treats others." Bruce leaned back, mockingly relaxed. "The Whitmore family? Quite right, Ethan. Our family sets its own standards. Not just anyone can waltz in and disrupt that order." His insult hung in the air so tangibly that no one dared speak. The other staff exchanged nervous glances, scarcely breathing. Kenya bowed her head, fighting to hide her emotions, though her chest tightened and tears threatened to spill. That was the last straw for Ethan. He rose abruptly, eyes blazing as he confronted Bruce. "I'm really disappointed in you, Bruce. Belittling and deliberately insulting an innocent woman doesn't make you stronger. It only exposes your own weakness and insecurity." Bruce went still, surprise and anger flickering in his blue eyes. Never had Ethan spoken to him so forcefully. Clenching his jaw, Bruce forced a calm expression and shot back. "Oh, so my brother, the one who left home for years, comes back and suddenly cares deeply about my manners. How interesting." With that, he stood, cast his napkin down on the table like a gauntlet, and stormed out, leaving the room in suffocating silence. Ethan watched his brother disappear, then turned to Kenya, his gaze soft with regret. "I'm truly sorry, Kenya. You didn't deserve that." Kenya lifted her head and offered him a grateful, compassionate smile, then bowed again and said in measured tones, "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. I'm all right." She knew her place well. Even with Ethan's defense, she remained just the household maid, and had no right to show hurt or emotion before them. Yet, in her heart, a warm gratitude for Ethan, her first ally in this household, began to blossom. And from that moment on, Kenya realized she could never return to the quiet life she once led. She had been drawn into a silent battle, her dignity and self-respect pitted against Bruce Whitmore's arrogance and cruelty, a war she had never asked for. But one fate seemed determined she would fight. The next day, the Whitmore estate lay in its usual peaceful hush after the storm of tension at last night's dinner. Kenya quietly carried on with her duties, forcing herself to appear as calm as if nothing had happened. Still, every footstep she took down the long, chilly hallway reminded her of the cold, contemptuous look Bruce had given her the night before. For the first time since she'd arrived in this house, Kenya felt her heart grow heavy. Once she'd finished tidying the main areas, Kenya was assigned to clean the family's private trophy gallery. She'd heard of it, but had never set foot inside. Gently pushing open the door, she paused in surprise at the room's solemn grandeur. Cherry, wood shelves, exquisitely carved, held rows of gleaming gold medals that caught the warm glow of the recessed lights overhead. As she surveyed every detail, her gaze landed on a large, ornate framed photograph prominently displayed at the center. In the portrait, Bruce Whitmore stood tall in his pristine white karate gi, beaming with pride as a hefty gold medal hung around his neck. The inscription read, "National Karate Championship, Open Weight Division." Kenya stared, her eyes drawn to the familiar black belt, once her dream, though she'd never had the chance to earn one herself. Suddenly, memories surged back. She recalled the days she'd stood on a karate mat, hearing cheers echo from the little but passionate crowd. Those had been her happiest moments. Each decisive punch and kick, every drop of sweat on the dojo floor as she pushed her limits. Back then, Kenya Johnson had been a rising star in her Atlanta suburb, racking up medals and praise from masters who lauded her natural talent and perseverance. Karate wasn't just a martial art to her. It was her pride, her lifeline, the drive that propelled her through hardship. But everything came crashing down when her world fell apart. Her mother's sudden death, her only family, forced her to abandon her martial dreams and find work to survive. The passionate young fighter had to grow up fast, burying her love for karate deep inside as a distant memory. Lost in thought, Kenya didn't notice Ethan standing in the doorway. He watched her intently, especially when she paused before Bruce's photo. Her eyes held something he'd never seen. Not fear, but a deep regret, a hidden longing peeking through her composed exterior. Softly, Ethan spoke, breaking her reverie. "Ah, Kenya, is there something about that picture that caught your eye?" Startled, Kenya turned to him, a flush of embarrassment creeping across her face. She quickly hid it and mustered her best smile. "Oh, nothing, Mr. Whitmore. I just think Bruce is very talented." Ethan was silent for a moment, his sharp gaze probing her, but his tone remained gentle. "I'm not convinced it's that simple. I saw the way you looked at it. I'm sure there's something more behind your expression." Kenya fell silent, her eyes avoiding his direct stare as her heart pounded, partly from surprise, partly from fear. She knew Ethan was intelligent and perceptive, and now he was suspecting the past she'd worked so hard to conceal. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm just a housekeeper. My past isn't exactly noteworthy," she murmured, more to herself than to him. Ethan took a step closer, still respectful, but his sincerity seemed to reach into her soul. "I disagree. Everyone's past is worth honoring, no matter who they are, and I believe yours is no exception." Kenya met his honest green eyes, feeling the warmth of his goodwill, but she held her ground. She couldn't let her deepest secrets slip, especially in the Whitmore house where every move was scrutinized. "Thank you for caring, sir, but really, there's nothing to tell," she said firmly, then turned back to her work, leaving Ethan alone in the gleaming trophy room, his mind full of questions. In that moment, Ethan realized Kenya was far from ordinary. He was more certain than ever that behind her reserved, humble facade lay a long story filled with secrets, perhaps the greatest of which was her own history with the karate Bruce so proudly displayed. And he knew that if he wanted to truly understand Kenya, he'd have to look beyond the walls she'd built around herself, though neither of them was ready for the truth that would surface. Saturday night at the Whitmore mansion had never been more alive. Affluent guests from across Atlanta had gathered in full force, clad in their finest, most elegant attire. Laughter and polite small talk echoed through the expansive main room, where crystal chandeliers cast a dazzling glow, creating an atmosphere both luxurious and ostentatious. Kenya moved gracefully among the crowd, balancing a polished silver tray of deep red wine glasses that caught the warm light as she passed. Yet tonight, she couldn't shake the growing unease in her chest. She sensed Bruce's eyes on her at every turn, the cruel smirk never leaving his arrogant face. Standing at the center of the guests, Bruce cut a striking figure in his perfectly tailored black suit, handsome yet dangerous. He chatted confidently, laughed easily, but his gaze flickered repeatedly toward Kenya, as if he were waiting for just the right moment to execute his plan. Just then, Ethan appeared at the front doors, instantly drawing the crowd's attention. Respected and admired for his sincerity and calm demeanor, so unlike Bruce, he made his way toward them. Before Ethan could utter a word, Bruce spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Oh, Ethan, you've arrived at the perfect time. I was just telling everyone here that there seems to be a secret karate master hiding somewhere in this Whitmore household." Ethan's brow creased. He immediately sensed Bruce's ulterior motive and asked, calm but firm, "Bruce, what are you up to?" Bruce shrugged and shot a challenging look toward Kenya, who stood nearby, His voice dripped with sarcasm. Actually, I was quite surprised to discover that Kenya, our esteemed housekeeper, appears to be a top-notch karate expert in disguise. Hard to believe, isn't it, everyone? All eyes turned to Kenya. She stood perfectly still, her heart hammering, yet her face remained composed and serene. She knew Bruce was trying to humiliate her in front of Atlanta's elite, but she resolved not to make it easy for him. Ethan glared at Bruce, his voice stern. "Bruce, I think you should stop this right now. You're taking it too far." But Ethan's warning only fueled Bruce's excitement. He stepped closer to Kenya, deliberately narrowing the distance and heightening the tension. "I don't see anything to hide, Kenya. If you really are as skilled as the rumors suggest, why not show everyone what you can do? Or are those rumors just lies?" Bruce's contemptuous smile was icy. Kenya inhaled deeply, lifted her chin, and met Bruce's stare with unwavering resolve. She knew exactly what he wanted, to prove in front of all these people that she was nothing more than an ordinary, lowly maid unworthy of Ethan's attention. Kenya stepped forward calmly, stopping directly in front of Bruce. Her voice rang out clear and strong, cutting through the murmurs. "Bruce, I accept your challenge, if it will satisfy you." Her words stunned the guests into silence. Curious, astonished, skeptical gazes fixed on her. No one expected an ordinary maid to face Bruce so directly and so composedly against the man they all regarded as a supremely powerful karate champion. For a moment, Bruce looked taken aback, but he quickly recovered his arrogant composure. He nodded, his cold smile deepening with malicious anticipation. "Very well, Kenya. I can't wait to see just how secret your talent really is." Ethan rushed forward and gripped Bruce's arm, his tone grave and worried. "Bruce, you don't understand what you're doing. Stop this dangerous game before it's too late." Bruce shrugged off Ethan's hand, his eyes blazing with challenge, his twisted grin revealing his contempt and rage. "Ethan, you always like to protect the weaker ones, don't you? But this time, you should prepare yourself to watch the woman you're so eager to defend be soundly defeated." With that, Bruce turned and strode away, self-satisfied, leaving Ethan standing in angry concern and Kenya standing firm and resolute. She knew this would be more than just a martial contest. It was a battle for her dignity and worth within the walls of the Whitmore home. Kenya caught Ethan's anxious gaze for a split second, saw his silent apology and worry, and offered him a gentle, reassuring smile. She understood more clearly than anyone that no matter how fierce the fight ahead might be, she would not back down, for this was not only a physical contest but a struggle to protect her honor and pride as a woman who had endured too many wounds in silence. Just after the party ended, night fell over the Whitmore estate, leaving it in an almost eerie silence. Bruce sat alone in his private study, the faint glow of his laptop illuminating the vast room full of opulent yet cold furnishings. Though he'd played the part of confident arrogance all evening, deep inside Bruce felt a growing unease he'd never experienced before. His hands trembled slightly as he typed Kenya Johnson into the search bar. A swirl of questions filled his mind about this seemingly harmless woman. Why had Kenya so boldly accepted his challenge? What was he missing about her? Irritated and curious, he scrolled through social profiles and personal photos, finding nothing remarkable. Frustrated, he nearly gave up, until his eyes landed on a small dusty link to a local website archiving regional karate tournaments. Despite a moment's hesitation, Bruce clicked. The outdated page loaded slowly, line by line. His heart pounded when he spotted a familiar face in a small black and white photo atop a 5-year-old news article. Kenya. He stared, stunned. beneath the image, a bold headline read, "Kenya Johnson, 3-time Atlanta Regional Karate Champion." Bruce froze, unable to believe what he saw. His fingers shook violently as he scrolled further, reading the fine print. Kenya Johnson, with exceptional technique and rare, powerful moves, has successfully defended her Atlanta women's karate title 3 years running, becoming a major pride of the local martial arts community. Each word felt like a blade piercing his pride. More photos appeared. Kenya in a crisp white gi, her face beaming with confident pride. Kenya delivering powerful kicks and flawless techniques, her opponents helpless on the mat. Bruce realized he had gravely underestimated her. He sat motionless, turmoil and fear surging through him, but he forced himself to clench his fist and suppress any hint of weakness. As a Whitmore, his pride and honor would not allow him to admit fear. He vowed he would not lose, especially not to someone he'd seen as nothing more than a mere maid. Bruce snapped his laptop shut, forcing calm back into his voice. Pacing restlessly, his resolve hardened. A voice in his mind rang out, clear and insistent. "I can't let this happen. I have to win at any cost." He strode to the door and threw it open, heading down the hall to the private dojo behind the mansion. This was where he reclaimed his confidence under pressure. He hastily donned his gi, tightened his black belt, and stood on the dark blue mat. Memories of his father's stern lessons, victory was the only goal, failure unacceptable, flooded back. Bruce unleashed a furious barrage of punches and kicks against the heavy bag, channeling all his anxiety and rage into each strike. Yet, no matter how hard he fought, visions of Kenya's sharp eyes and flawless techniques haunted him. Gasping, sweat drenched his uniform. He glanced at the large framed photo on the wall, himself, metal gleaming, arrogance smiling back. Gritting his teeth, Bruce reminded himself that this fight wasn't just about defending his pride. It was about protecting the power and reputation he'd painstakingly built. He vowed then to do whatever it took to win. Bruce knew he could no longer dismiss Kenya as an easy opponent, nor could he allow anyone, especially Ethan, to witness his defeat. He understood that harsh methods might be necessary. Fueled by mounting rage and wounded pride, Bruce's eyes grew colder and sharper than ever. He silently pledged that his match against Kenya would not be just another fight. It would be the ultimate battle, one that decided the fate of Bruce Whitmore's honor and power. Yet deep down, Bruce felt an undeniable fear for the first time, a vague, haunting dread of facing a mysterious adversary he still didn't truly understand. And that fear, whether he liked it or not, was eating away at the pride he'd always protected at any cost. That Sunday afternoon, the sunset bathed the sky in a stunning orange, gold, a sharp contrast to the tense atmosphere now gripping the Whitmore backyard. What was usually a familiar space had been transformed into a makeshift arena, rows of chairs neatly arranged around a dark, blue training mat, with impeccably dressed high society guests gathered, equal parts curious and eager, to witness this unusual duel. In the center the mat lay pristine, drawing every eye. Unbeknownst to the crowd dazzled by the evening's glamour, a far fiercer battle awaited, one of pride, dignity, and honor. Bruce strode out first from the grand doors, exuding casual confidence that bordered on arrogance. He wore a flawless white karate gi, custom, tailored down to the last stitch, with his gleaming black belt tied perfectly at his waist, a clear symbol of his superior rank. Pausing center stage, he surveyed the audience with a proud smirk, basking in their applause. Moments later, a small rear door opened, and Kenya stepped out calmly. Her simple, well-worn gai stood in stark contrast to Bruce's finery, yet there was a fierce determination in her eyes that commanded attention. She walked forward with steady, unshakable steps, as though she were exactly where she belonged, and nothing, no pressure, no judging glances could rattle her. The assembled guests whispered among themselves, eyes flicking between skepticism and amusement. A few quietly bet that the match would end quickly in Kenya's disgrace. To them, a housemaid could never hope to match Bruce Whitmore, the nation's celebrated and self-important karate champion. Bruce took a few steps toward her, bowing curtly, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Kenya returned the bow with solemn precision, performing the formal karate salute with a calmness that drew gasps from the spectators. They each retreated to their starting positions as the referee, hand-picked by Bruce, raised his arm to signal the start of the bout. At the shout of "Begin!" Bruce exploded forward with terrifying speed, unleashing a flurry of powerful pinpoint kicks and strikes. The crowd erupted in cheers as he dominated the opening exchange, his champion's caliber on full display. Kenya was forced back, expertly evading each razor-sharp attack. The onlookers were certain it was a one-sided affair. Bruce pressed the assault relentlessly, driving her onto the defensive, his cold smile widening as he saw no sign of a counterattack. But only Bruce knew the turmoil beneath his composed exterior. Each blow he delivered was fueled by anxiety and impatience, a silent fear that Kenya, once a champion herself, might turn the tide. He dared not give her an opening. At ringside, Ethan stood with clenched fists and taut shoulders, every fiber of him sensing the danger Kenya faced under Bruce's merciless onslaught. He knew Bruce's goal wasn't merely victory. It was to humiliate her in front of everyone. "Bruce, stop this madness," Ethan murmured under his breath, eyes locked on the action. Meanwhile, Kenya's defense remained rock solid. Her cold, focused gaze betrayed no panic. Though pressed hard, she maintained perfect composure, waiting for the precise moment to strike back. The audience watched, pitying her, convinced she'd collapse under the pressure any second. Then, as Bruce overextended with a high, arcing kick, confident in its power but careless in its form, Kenya's eyes snapped to life. In a heartbeat, she slipped aside with flawless precision and executed a deft sweep that unbalanced Bruce, sending him stumbling back. An abrupt hush fell over the arena. Bruce froze, panic flickering in his eyes. His carefully masked fear spilled into view, yet pride would not let him yield. Gritting his teeth, he lashed out again with even greater force. Kenya remained unmoved, her expression as calm as a still lake, but with an inner fire blazing brighter than ever. The contest had taken an electrifying turn, and everyone now realized the petite, unassuming woman before them was a formidable opponent, upending every expectation and prejudice they'd held. Kenya understood this was more than a physical fight. It was her test of character, of her honor and self-respect, and she was ready for everything it would demand. In the suffocating tension, every well-heeled guest's eyes were fixed on the ring. Kenya stood there in her unassuming attire, but her eyes had sharpened, burning with a determination never seen before. For the first time in his life, Bruce felt truly confronted by an opponent who would not yield as easily as all the others. After Kenya's counterattack, Bruce staggered back, his eyes wide with shock and anger. He could not believe that a mere housekeeper, this slight, unthreatening woman, had executed such a clean, precise leg sweep, throwing him off balance. He felt the crowd's stunned, skeptical stares like invisible daggers piercing his pride, which he had defended at all costs. Fear and fury rose up in Bruce, but he clenched his fists and suppressed any sign of weakness. His pride would not allow defeat, especially not at the hands of someone like Kenya. His expression turned ice, cold, as he resolved to use his most dangerous techniques to end this fight by any means necessary. Without hesitation, Bruce lunged again, faster, stronger, and far more ferocious than before. He unleashed razor, sharp, roundhouse kicks and vicious hand strikes aimed at Kenya's most vulnerable points. He no longer cared about rules or sportsmanship. He only cared about victory and shattering the resilient image Kenya had just forged in everyone's minds. Kenya was forced onto the defensive, feeling the full force of Bruce's ruthless barrage. The crowd cheered as Bruce reclaimed the offensive, some even hoping this would conclude in Kenya's ignominious defeat. But at the moment when Kenya seemed cornered, Bruce's impatience betrayed him. In his desperation to win, he lashed out with an illegal, bone-crushing chop aimed squarely at Kenya's neck, far beyond the bounds of a friendly match. The audience fell silent, horrified. Ethan leapt to his feet, his face ashen, his heart in his throat, convinced Kenya wouldn't escape the savage blow. Bruce, in that predator, like frenzy, had abandoned all honor and control. Yet Kenya, defying every fearful thought in the room, stood perfectly still, completely focused. Her eyes were unnaturally calm, as if Bruce's brutal strike moved in slow motion. In a single, impeccably timed motion, she slipped aside, narrowly evading his most dangerous attack. Bruce, momentum unchecked, crashed forward, leaving himself completely exposed. That was the moment Kenya had been waiting for. With a fluid, powerful spin, she delivered a flawless roundhouse kick, her technique so precise it seemed impossible. The blow landed squarely on Bruce's upper torso, driving him off his feet. In a terrifying instant, he was hurled into the air and slammed onto the mat with a bone, jarring thud that echoed across the yard. A deathly silence descended. No one could believe their eyes. Bruce Whitmore, the arrogant national karate champion, the man of power, lay motionless on the ground, his face drained of color, his usual pride utterly gone. Kenya rose deliberately, maintaining her composed stance, drawing in a deep breath. She looked down at Bruce without a trace of triumph or gloating. Her expression was serene, but her eyes glimmered with relief and quiet pride, as though a hidden burden she had carried all along had finally lifted. Bruce lay there, hearing the stunned whispers and incredulous gasps around him. Eyes that had once admired him now stared with shock or even contempt. Humiliation and shame, unlike anything he'd ever known, flooded him, and he longed to disappear into the earth. He tried to rise, but his body refused to obey. His gaze met Ethan's. A look of bitter disappointment and anger reflected back at him. Bruce realized he hadn't just lost a fight. He had squandered the last shred of respect his brother had for him. Kenya bowed respectfully in formal karate salute and turned to leave the arena, never needing applause or cheers from the crowd. Ethan watched her go, swelling with admiration and pride. He understood that this victory was far more than physical. It was the clearest proof of the resilience, dignity, and inner strength of the woman everyone had once overlooked. And Bruce, lying in disgrace, felt the world he'd once commanded crumble away, leaving him alone with the bitter consequences of his own making. The heavy silence lingered after Bruce's humiliating fall. In that brief moment, the entire expanse of the Whitmore backyard seemed frozen. No one dared utter a word. Kenya walked off the mat with her face perfectly composed, yet deep in her eyes, an invisible wound quietly bled. Bruce lay on the ground, every muscle aching, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the blow to his pride. The shame of being sprawled out before the judging, pitying gazes of these distinguished guests burned him from the inside. For the first time in his life, Bruce truly felt the sting of a crushing defeat he'd always considered impossible. He forced himself to sit up, his eyes flashing with rage and hatred as he stared at Kenya. A cruel thought formed swiftly in his mind. He could never, would never, accept this loss. To Bruce, Kenya hadn't just stolen his victory. She'd stolen his respect and his pride, things he believed belonged only to him. Slowly, he got to his feet, face contorted with anger and arrogance as he addressed the watching crowd. Then, raising his voice in a cold, malicious tone that shattered the afternoon stillness, he declared, "Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we have all been spectacularly deceived." Everyone's eyes snapped to him in astonishment and curiosity. Ethan instantly recognized Bruce was about to stoop to another low, his heart tightening with dread. Bruce continued in a venomous, affected voice. "Kenya here isn't just an unexpectedly skilled fighter. She's also a talented actress. She clearly knows how to capture attention, especially that of my brother Ethan Whitmore. I wonder if this was all part of her perfect plan to ingratiate herself with and exploit this wealthy family." The guests erupted in murmurs. Bruce's baseless, vicious accusation was like a blade to Kenya's honor and dignity. Kenya stood frozen, her heart clenched by the cruelty of his slander. She had endured so much from this family, but Bruce's words crossed a line she could not tolerate. Sensing the crowd's reaction, Bruce felt emboldened and pressed on with scornful mockery. What a pity, right? A petite housekeeper resorting to seduction and feigned innocence to reach her goals. But tell me, Kenya, do you really think a lucky kick can cover up your true scheme? Bruce's tone dripped with contempt as he sought to humiliate her further to salvage his shattered pride. Kenya clenched her fist, forcing herself not to break under his malicious lies. At that moment, Ethan could no longer remain silent. He stepped forward, eyes blazing with anger, and snapped, "That's enough, Bruce. Do you even realize what you're doing? If you lose, accept it. Stop acting like a cowardly monster." Bruce recoiled at Ethan's fierce outburst, but quickly recovered his defiant sneer. "Oh, Ethan, I forgot you always defend this poor little maid. Has she already manipulated you too?" Ethan ground his teeth and spoke in a cold, unwavering voice that everyone could hear. "Bruce, today I finally see you for who you are. You cloak your insecurity and weakness in arrogance and contempt for others. Don't think that smearing Kenya will make people forget it was you who used underhanded, unethical tactics to try to win at any cost." Ethan's words struck Bruce like a knockout blow, draining color from his face. The surrounding crowd began to look at Bruce with disappointment and scorn. Kenya stood motionless. Ethan's defense warmed her heart, but she knew she couldn't stay. Bruce's slander, although untrue, had cut her dignity deeply. She realized this was her breaking point. She approached Ethan and said softly but firmly, "Thank you for everything, Mr. Whitmore, but I think it's time for me to leave." Ethan watched her go, helpless and pained, but understanding her need to protect her own honor. He could only stand there as she walked away, his heart heavy with anger and injustice. Kenya turned and strode from the estate grounds. The guests left, stunned in her wake. She didn't look back, knowing the bitterness and pain of her past lay behind her, and she had to move forward to safeguard herself. Bruce stood frozen, experiencing for the first time the true victory wasn't in a physical contest he'd always bragged about, but in the self, respect, dignity, and honor he'd just completely lost in front of everyone. And now he understood that the bitterest consequence wasn't losing to Kenya, but losing the last shred of respect from Ethan, the only brother he'd ever admired and respected, an outcome he'd wrought with his own hands and was forced to endure. As soon as Kenya walked away, her small figure disappearing into the distance, a heavy stillness settled over the Whitmore estate. Ethan stood rooted to the spot, his eyes locked on the empty space she had just left. A deep regret and shame washed over him as he replayed the cruel insults she'd endured, spoken by his own brother. Bruce, broken and humiliated, retreated to his private chambers, leaving behind the bitter truth of who he really was, something he'd hidden for years. Ethan watched his brother vanish inside, feeling both powerless and disappointed. Above all, his thoughts raced to Kenya, the woman who had awakened feelings in him he'd never known under his family's cold shadow. He made his decision in an instant. He couldn't let Kenya slip away like this. He couldn't allow her to leave his life when his heart had finally rediscovered genuine emotion. Without hesitation, Ethan stormed out of the Whitmore mansion, ignoring the guests' astonished glances and whispered gossip. He abandoned it all, privilege, reputation, stifling social rules, to chase after the woman who had touched his soul. He drove relentlessly through endless avenues, steering away from the world of opulence and into a humble suburban neighborhood on Atlanta's outskirts. Here, there were no grand estates or glittering lights, just simple cottages, alive with the ordinary laughter and chatter of everyday life. Ethan pulled up before Kenya's small home, his heart pounding like never before. He stepped out of the car and approached the front porch, where he found Kenya sitting alone, her gaze distant, as though she still carried the weight of yesterday's wounds. She looked up at the sound of his footsteps, her eyes widening in surprise when she recognized him. Quickly rising, she braced herself with composed calm, her voice soft but steady. "Mr. Whitmore, why have you come here?" Ethan drew closer, looking into her eyes with genuine intensity, his voice trembling with sincerity. "I came to apologize. I can't stand what Bruce said to you today. You didn't deserve any of those insults, Kenya." Kenya stared at him with gratitude mixed with cautious doubt. She saw the feeling in his eyes, but she also knew how vast the gulf between their worlds was. Could a woman of her modest means truly belong with a man of Ethan's wealth and power? She shook her head gently, emotion in her tone, but clear-headed. "Thank you, Ethan. But you know as well as I do that we come from two very different worlds. I can't step into yours, and you wouldn't fit into mine." Ethan refused to relent. He stepped even closer, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder, his gaze earnest. "Kenya, I'm not here to drag you into my world, nor to force myself into yours. What I want is to build an entirely new world, a world for just the two of us, where there are no prejudices, no rich, poor divides, where we can simply be ourselves." Kenya stood speechless. His heartfelt words stirred something in her, and she saw the genuine resolve in his eyes, but the scars left by the Whitmore family's cruelty ran deep. "Ethan, I'm touched by what you're saying, but do you really understand what you're asking? Are you prepared to give up everything, to leave behind the life you know to live simply with me?" Ethan looked deeply into her eyes, without hesitation, his voice unwavering. "Kenya, I gave all of that up the moment I left the mansion today. What I've wanted all along isn't those glittering privileges. It's to find my own heart, to find the one person who makes me feel truly alive. And that person is you." His words trembled with emotion and conviction, catching Kenya completely off guard. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she held them back, her gaze filled with sincerity and gratitude. "Ethan, I want to believe you, but the life you're offering isn't always easy. Are you sure you won't regret this?" Ethan gently took her hand and held it firmly, looking straight into her eyes. "I've never been more certain of anything. I'm ready to face any hardship as long as you're by my side. We'll build a new life together, our own world of happiness." Kenya studied him for a long moment. Doubt melted away, replaced by a growing love that filled her heart. She offered him a small, genuine smile and nodded. In that moment, they both understood they had found each other, and a new world where love and honesty transcended every barrier. From that day forward, they would embark on a new journey together, seeking true happiness for both their hearts. From the moment Kenya nodded in agreement, Ethan knew his life would never be the same. His heart swelled with happiness, yet fluttered with excitement and worry at the challenges ahead. He understood their chosen path wouldn't be easy, but that only made it more meaningful. In the days that followed, Kenya and Ethan set to work turning their shared dream into reality. They spent hours together planning, evolving their idea of a martial arts center into something concrete. Ethan quickly sold his personal assets, symbols of his former privileged life, resolving to dedicate everything he had to build a new future where everyone would have an equal chance to grow and transform their lives. After a long search, they discovered an old, abandoned building on Atlanta's outskirts. Though run down, the structure held immense potential, a perfect site for their vision. They rolled up their sleeves and began renovations, repainting weathered walls, clearing debris, and scrubbing each window pane. With every passing day, they realized they weren't merely creating a karate school. They were laying the foundation for a brighter tomorrow, where people would be judged by their spirit, not their status or background. When the center was ready, they christened it Root Project, symbolizing that true strength springs from our roots, our core values, the strength within each person. They opened the facility free of charge to children, women, and disadvantaged veterans, those often forgotten by society. Their mission was to make karate a powerful tool for the vulnerable to reclaim confidence, courage, and above all, their own self-respect. It didn't take long for Root Project to gain attention. The first visitors brought diverse life stories. Youngsters who'd never been given a chance, women who'd endured abuse and injustice, veterans overlooked after returning from service. Under Kenya's dedicated guidance, they began to discover the power within themselves. Kenya taught not only karate techniques but also the spirit of martial arts, lessons in perseverance, compassion, and resilience in the face of adversity. Each time she watched a child or a woman regain hope and strength, she understood that her own past pains were not in vain. They were the wellspring of her empathy and drive to empower others. Ethan, once a wealthy man trapped in luxury and loneliness, now devoted himself fully to Root Project. He managed day-to-day operations and spearheaded community fundraising to keep the center thriving. Over time, he became an indispensable part of this small community, respected not for his status or wealth, but for his genuine care and dedication to each individual. As the months passed, Ethan and Kenya grew even closer. They worked side by side, faced hardships together, and celebrated small victories every day. They learned that love wasn't just the fierce emotion of early romance, but also mutual understanding, sharing, and growing together through life's toughest trials. One afternoon, as they tidied up after class, a young mother clutching her little daughter entered the center. Her eyes were lined with exhaustion and despair. Kenya approached gently, and soon learned the woman had fled a violent marriage. In that moment, Kenya realized Root Project had become more than a dojo. It was a sanctuary for those seeking hope and strength. From that day on, the center offered not just karate training but also counseling and life skills workshops, helping people rebuild their lives with positivity. The community's transformation drew the attention of charities and donors, but what brought Ethan and Kenya the greatest joy weren't the donations. It was the radiant smiles and newfound confidence of those they helped. One evening, after a long day's work, Ethan and Kenya sat on the center's front steps. Ethan gently took Kenya's hand, his voice soft yet filled with gratitude and joy. "Kenya, thank you. I never imagined life could be so meaningful. You showed me how beautiful life can be when we live for others." Kenya looked at Ethan, her eyes shining with deep emotion and love. She squeezed his hand and smiled warmly in response. "No, Ethan, you're the one who helped me rediscover life's true purpose. Thank you for choosing me and for building this new world with me." In that moment, they both knew the future they were creating was more than just for themselves. It was a priceless gift to all who yearned for a second chance to find a better life. While Ethan and Kenya were building their new, meaningful life step by step, Bruce remained trapped in the deep darkness of his own making. The hushed whispers and judging stares from the high, society friends, and community who once surrounded him were now nothing but cold, cruel echoes. Everyone Bruce thought would stand by him had turned away, leaving him alone in the very world he once ruled with arrogance. Each passing day grew heavier for Bruce. He no longer attended lavish parties or appeared at prestigious martial arts events where he'd once been at the center of attention. His grand room in the Whitmore mansion fell into silence and darkness, a deserted fortress where he imprisoned himself alongside his endless shame and guilt. In his mind, Bruce replayed that day's fight over and over, the moment Kenya felled him with a perfect kick, and the look of profound disappointment on Ethan's face when he'd slandered her publicly. Those memories stabbed at his pride, chipping away the strong facade he'd built over the years. He sank into sleepless nights, plagued by nightmares every evening. The confidence and arrogance that had once been his greatest weapons had become his cruelest enemies, sowing seeds of deep fear and insecurity. He felt himself spiraling into an inescapable vortex of despair and confusion. Finally, Bruce had to admit he couldn't pull himself from this abyss alone. Despite his initial reluctance and pride, he resolved to seek help from a renowned Atlanta psychologist, Dr. Emma Sullivan. The first therapy sessions were difficult and tense. Bruce remained cold and defensive, unwilling to reveal his true vulnerability. But Emma's patience and skill slowly helped him peel away his hardened layers and confront the deepest wounds in his soul. After weeks of facing himself honestly, Bruce began to understand that all his past behavior had stemmed from a profound insecurity, a fear of not being recognized, of always living in Ethan's shadow, the perfect big brother he both admired and envied. That obsession drove him to cruelty and aggression to mask his own feelings of inadequacy. Bruce realized that from childhood, he'd been taught that only victory gave life value. He'd convinced himself his worth existed only at the pinnacle of acclaim, and that belief led him to today's catastrophic downfall. In one particularly powerful session, Emma asked Bruce a question he would never forget. "Bruce, if you stripped away every title, every dollar, every ounce of power you've ever held, then who would you be? What remains of you?" The question stunned him. He couldn't answer. It hit him that he'd never truly known who he was without the trappings of glory and privilege. Gradually, Bruce began to change. He learned to accept and forgive himself, though the process was painful and tearful. He came to see that admitting guilt did not weaken him. Rather, it made him stronger and more mature. One afternoon, summoning all his courage, Bruce returned to the Whitmore Mansion's karate trophy room, the very shrine to his pride. Standing before his gleaming medals, he felt no pride. Instead, he felt profound regret for the values he'd lost in his pursuit of personal glory. Bruce decided to leave the Whitmore estate for good. He rented a small, modest apartment and began a simpler, calmer life. For the first time, he shopped for his own groceries, cooked his own meals, did everything without servants or fanfare. He also started volunteering quietly, supporting disadvantaged children through small acts of kindness. Those moments of genuine joy, so rare in his opulent past, taught him humility and the true meaning of living authentically. But Bruce knew that to fully emerge from darkness, he had to face those he'd hurt most, Ethan and Kenya. One day, he gathered courage and went to visit the Root Project, Ethan and Kenya's Marshall Arts Center. Standing outside, peering through the windows, Bruce saw the happiness, the smiles, and the love they shared with their community. He realized that they were the true victors, people who lived for others and built lives of real significance. Taking a deep breath, Bruce steeled himself and stepped inside. He didn't expect an immediate pardon, but he wanted Ethan and Kenya to know he had genuinely changed. Bruce understood the road to forgiveness would be long and arduous, but he was ready to walk it. Because now he knew that true victory wasn't about defeating others, it was about overcoming his own weaknesses and fears. And he believed this would be the most important fight of his life, the fight to reclaim his true worth and learn to live a humble, meaningful life. The grand opening day of Root Project arrived, bathed in soft golden sunlight and a clear blue sky that seemed to bless Ethan and Kenya's heartfelt efforts. The center was modestly but meaningfully decorated. Each chair and every sign bore the mark of the many hands that had come together to build this dream. Kenya stood at the small wooden podium, her eyes shining with emotion as she looked down at the attentive faces before her, faces that had once known only pain, but now brimmed with hope for a new life. Ethan stood by her side, pride and love in his gaze as his heart swelled with a happiness he hadn't known for so long. Kenya spoke in a voice both gentle and clear. "Hello, everyone. Today is not just the opening of a Marshall Arts Center. It's the beginning of a new journey, our journey to reclaim self, respect, dignity, and the true strength within each of us. I once believed that power lay in defeating others, but now I know that real strength isn't measured by titles or force. It's found in our ability to rise after every fall, in the compassion we show, and in the humility we offer to those around us." The audience fell silent, moved by her words. Kenya continued, her voice brimming with sincerity. "I used to be a maid, bearing the contempt and scorn of many others. But those hardships taught me my own worth. Our dignity isn't defined by our background or wealth, but by how we face challenges and learn to love and respect ourselves. Today, standing here, I want each of us to know that we all deserve love, respect, and the chance to be the hero of our own story." A heartfelt round of applause broke out, not out of courtesy, but because every person there felt those words strike straight to their hearts. In a quiet corner of the hall, a familiar figure slipped inside, silent and hesitant. Bruce stood at the back, unrecognizable from the proud, confident man he once was. He wore simple clothes and carried a thoughtful, composed expression. This was the first time Bruce appeared without seeking attention or recognition. He made his way to the small donation box by the entrance, where guests were contributing to keep the center going. With slightly trembling hands, Bruce withdrew a small envelope and placed it inside with genuine resolve. For the first time in his life, he felt a true lightness, no longer burdened by ego or pride. Though small, This act marked the first step in his journey to reclaim himself and emerge from his past darkness. Up front, Ethan caught sight of that familiar silhouette. His heart clenched with a complex mix of emotion. He glanced at Kenya and saw that she, too, had noticed Bruce. Their eyes met, sharing a silent understanding, a quiet forgiveness and empathy unfolding naturally, without words. Bruce stepped away from the center, feeling freer than he had in years. He understood that true forgiveness doesn't come from begging, but from changing one's actions and attitude. And though he knew the road ahead would be long, this moment was the best new beginning he could have hoped for. The opening ceremony wound down in laughter and hopeful smiles. Ethan turned to Kenya, gently taking her hand, and whispered loud enough for her to hear, "I believe this is our greatest victory, Kenya. We've shown that real strength isn't about defeating others, but about lifting them up, giving them faith and a second chance." Kenya nodded, smiling with gratitude and joy. "That's right, Ethan. And the best part is that we didn't have to walk this path alone." Together, they gazed toward the fading sunset outside, soft orange and gold hues draping the sky in peaceful promise. It was a symbol of a new future, one where prejudice fell away and true strength was born of compassion, humility, and forgiveness. In that moment, everyone at Root Project understood that today's story wasn't an ending, but a hopeful new beginning, a place where every person has the right to live with love, respect, and equality. Ethan, Kenya, and even Bruce had each found their true strength within, the courage to face themselves, to heal past wounds, and to build lives rich with meaning and compassion. So we've journeyed through a story of resilience, humility, and inner strength. Proof that beating prejudice and finding true happiness relies on our capacity to forgive and embrace one another. What do you think? Is forgiveness the hardest step toward healing life's wounds? If you enjoyed this story, please hit like, share this video with friends and family to spread these positive messages, and don't forget to subscribe to join me on more heartfelt journeys ahead. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video,